Hello writers! So in this video we're going to be talking about reading strategies, those being strategies that you can apply before we start reading. So in future videos you will see strategies that you can do while you read, then strategies you can do after you finish reading. So today we'll be talking specifically about what should we do or things that we can do before we even start reading. So the strategies that we'll be going over in this video are 1. To establish context, 2. To read rhetorically, to preview, and to read the abstract. So those are the 4 strategies that we'll be going over in this video. So the first one is to establish context. So before we begin reading an article, it can be important to learn some background on who wrote the article and why. So oftentimes doing research on the author or multiple authors of this text that we're trying to read can give us some context on who was this person, what were they thinking, and why did they write this article. Just giving us that background can really help establish necessary information that can help us understand what we are about to read. So things that we can do to establish, background could be asking ourselves, who is the author? How does the author's background, so once we learn a little bit about the author, how does their background, their personal experiences, how does it affect the point of view that they have when they wrote this thing? How does the author connect to the topic of the text? So it's connected to that second question again of, does this author have personal experiences, have information, are they an expert on this topic? The fourth question, is the author known for discussing this topic in his or her other works? So basically, is this a reliable source? Can I trust this person on what they're saying because, they're famous for talking about this topic, or they have done plenty of research on this topic? Should I trust them? So it's definitely something that we want to ask ourselves before we start reading anything. It's, can I trust what they're going to say? So I'll be showing you all how to apply this strategy by using Deborah Brand's Sponsors of Literacy article. If I were to pretend I'm reading this article and I'm going to apply this strategy, well, the first thing I need to do is Google. Or go to Google, because I don't know who this author is, so I need to do some research, and this is what I found. So apparently she has published more than 24 articles in book chapters, so she's an established author, and she puts forward the notion of sponsors of literacy. She writes sponsors as I have come to think of them, motto, etc. Right? So we have this definition about sponsors of literacy. And again, the article is named Sponsors of Literacy, which means that if this is one of the first things that comes out when I do research, so this comes out from Wikipedia. So literally the first thing that pops up when I search your name is Wikipedia page. This is the information that first acknowledges who this author is, and it's clearly having to do with sponsors of literacy. When I apply this particular reading strategy and I ask who the author is, well, it kind of clarifies some other questions that I have to ask myself, which is the author known for discussing his or her point of view on this topic in other texts? Yes. Clearly, she is very well known for sponsors of literacy. So this article is definitely one where she is very famous. I didn't do that much research into Deborah Brand, so I really can't clarify what her experiences as an author have affected the way that she has shaped sponsors of literacy. But I do know that she's an established author, so clearly she has done a lot of research, and well, now she's going to share what she has to say, right? So these are the things that I would write. So if I were to need to demonstrate to my professor I'm applying these reading strategies, I would have the questions on one side of the page, and on the other I would have my responses to the questions, right? So I would say that I do think that this is an established author, that she's known for discussing this, so she's a trusted source, and clearly she's an educator, right, who has done research and now wants to educate others, right? So this is me applying the strategy to Deborah Brand's Sponsors of Literacy. This is something that you would do if you were trying to use this strategy. Do background and attempt to answer these questions based on the knowledge that you got when doing research. These are, again, the questions that you will ask yourself. All right. So strategy number 2, which is rhetorical reading, aka reading like a writer. So rhetoric is a fancy word of saying you can communicate effectively. So you can communicate well, which means when you write, you always think about your audience, your purpose, and form. Who am I writing for? Why am I writing this? And what is the best way to send my message to this audience, right? So as writers, we want to read like writers, right? Always constantly thinking, what choices did this author make that I can replicate in my writing? Questions that you want to ask yourself to, help you get into the mindset are things like, who is the intended audience of this text? So again, applying it to Deborah Brand's Sponsors of Literacy, I already know what my author's purpose was, right? What was the reason for her to write this? And at the same time, I kind of get an idea of who the audience is. So the purpose was to educate others on what she discovered. Educate who? That's the question, right? That's the audience. More than likely, other educators. For me, as an educator, I know what this is meant for me. But let's say I'm reading this for my professor, and hence I'm a student. That would mean then that I am not the audience, right? So what then? So what happens when I am not the intended audience? Which is what will more than likely happen when you get assigned a reading in college by your professors. You will more than likely discover that I am not the audience. So then you have to question yourself, why am I reading this? If this wasn't written for me, why am I reading this? What should I be getting out of this reading? And so to find that out, to find out that purpose, you can, one, ask your professor, and sometimes they might be really straightforward and tell you this is why they want you to read the article. Sometimes they might give you a brief lecture before or after the reading to give you highlights of what the most important ideas from the reading, and that will give you a sense of the purpose. But oftentimes you might just have to establish your own goals, establish your own reasons for reading that article. So these were the goals that I would have come up with if I was assigned to read Deborah Brand's article. So first of all, I'm going to pretend this is the first time that I'm ever hearing this term, sponsors of literacy. I kind of know what the term sponsors are, but I've only seen them related to like sports, so I don't know what it has to do with literacy. So that would be a goal that I would have, just based purely on looking at the article's title, background that I've done on Deborah Brand. This would be the goals that I would set, to learn what sponsors of literacy are, and then hopefully to get an example so that I could get a better understanding of the definition, and maybe see, hey, do I have any sponsors of literacy in my own life, right? How does this connect to me, right? So establishing goals would help if you do the other strategy first, do background on the author, but it's not always necessary. You can create your own goals simply based on the article's title. You could look at the abstract, which is usually a summary of the article, and use that to create your own goals. The third strategy is called previewing. So previewing is asking us to skim through the entire reading for anything that pops out and catches our attention. So when we preview, we want to look for the following. We want to look for the title. So the title is really important. Deborah Brand's Sponsors of Literacy is really a short title, but most articles have really lengthy titles because they really do summarize what this article is about in their title. So titles are really important. After that, looking at the subheadings, how is this article going to be divided? Any images that pop out, their captions, so the description of those images are important. Anything that's in bold, really anything that's underlined, in italics, anything that really just pops out that lets us know what is this article going to be about, which is also something that you can do when you're trying to establish your goals. So again, doing background on the author or just looking into what pops out from the article can really help you establish your goals. So in Deborah Brand's Sponsors of Literacy, the title is right up next to the author's name, which is usually what would always be the case in any article. We have two subheadings here, sponsorship and access, which kind of gives me the information of I can find what the definition of sponsored literacy is there, which again was my goal. So I know that I will get that goal reached because somewhere in those two sections they have to give me a definition. Is an image not from Deborah Brands, because Deborah Brands' article does not have any images. So I'm bringing in another article, which is called Why University Students Don't Read, What Professors Can Do to Increase Compliance. So this is a good example of a really lengthy title that gives us crystal clear information on what this article will be about, which is, hey, students don't read, professors, you need to do this. This is written by Mary E. Hoft. So again, looking at the title can really give us an idea of what this article will be about, as well as help us establish goals for ourselves, because clearly here students will not be the audience. The audience are professors. It's literally written in the title, right? But we do have an example here of an image. So one of the images that they have are screenshots of a survey that Hoff did to get responses from students. And the caption, it's really basic, table 1, table 2. So I have not read at this point the article, so I have no idea what the survey is connected to, but I have some sort of idea that Hoff did research. So I can trust that the point of view she's going to share is not biased, that she did research to try to put together what professors should do to help students read. So again, things that you can look for when previewing is to look at the title, subheadings, images, captions, and bold print. So this is one of those strategies that on its own might not work so well. It might work best to combine it with the previous strategy of trying to set goals, trying to establish who the audience is, what the author's purpose is. On its own, it might not be as strong. So the next strategy is to look for the abstract, which is something that I mentioned previously, but I didn't really explain what it was. So an abstract is a paragraph that is found typically right after the article's title and right before the introduction. So in between that, it gives us an overview of what the article is about. So these are things that you would find in an abstract. First, it will tell you the research question or the problem that they're trying to discuss in their article. They tell us the methodology, which is basically how did they do their research, how did they find an answer to their question, how are they attempting to find the solution to their problem. And then, spoiler alert, they give us the main findings, the most important ideas that they found when doing their research. They also really try to sell to you to read the article. So they try to tell you this is why this research is important, this is why you should read it. So an abstract is a really, really great place to find an overall summary of what the article is about. So you can definitely use it to, again, establish your goals for reading, find out the author's purpose, who the audience is, etc. So on its own, just reading it might not work as well as if you do something with this abstract. So, in Deborah Brand's Sponsored Literacy article, unfortunately, there is no abstract. But there was one in that other article that I showed you, the Hoft article of Why University Students Don't Read. So here is her abstract, and it starts with, this article reports findings from 2 studies assessing reading compliance, and ends with finding that quizzes and graded journals greatly increase reading compliance. So here we have an entire summary of what her article is about. Like I said, spoiler alerts, it's something that's very common in these abstracts, but it is really important for research. So if I was trying to write a research paper and trying to look for articles that would support me, I wouldn't want to waste my time reading an entire 20-30 page article and to find out this was not necessary when I could have just read an abstract, a few sentences, find out in 2-3 minutes, is this something it's worth my time to read, yes or no? So again, these strategies can be important when trying to do research, when just trying to find out, should I read this or not, like previewing, reading the abstract. As for trying to use them for comprehension, like if this is going to help me really understand what I'm reading, previewing and abstract strategies won't help as much as trying to establish some reading goals or trying to do background on the author. Again, the abstract contains what's the main problem, the methodology, the findings, and why the research is significant. So again, these are the 4 reading strategies that we went over: establishing context, reading rhetorically, previewing, and reading the abstract. So the first 2 are really the strategies that I would encourage you to do before you start reading to help you with comprehension. So if you want strategies to help you with comprehending what you're going to read, use the first 2, which is do background on the research and establish reading goals. The next 2, previewing and abstract, are goals that will help you with establishing your goals or background overall, what the purpose and audience of the article is, not so much for reading comprehension. As well as if you're doing some sort of research and you want to just quickly know this article is going to help you or not, previewing and reading the abstract are what will help you. So why should you apply strategies before you begin to read? Because oftentimes, really, we only do strategies while we read. And so that's why I wanted to create 3 separate videos, so that you have 3 different ways of using strategies: before you read, during reading, and then after reading. So why would I encourage you to use strategies before you begin to read? Well, first, it'll help you create a mind map. So establishing background helps us establish a map of what am I about to read. Why was this article created? The abstract is literally a summary of the entire article. So we already have an idea of how is this going to start, what's going to happen in the middle, and then how is this overall article going to conclude. So we have a basic outline in our minds of what should this article be about. So in a way, it will help with comprehension of understanding this is what I should be getting out of this art. And reading goals. I think reading goals are really important to have, especially when we really have no idea why we are assigned to read a particular assignment, which is usually what happens in college, where our professor just tells us, read this by this date, and you're expected to do so, but never really expressed or explained why. So setting your own goals, your own reason for reading will motivate you to read and actually read the article, not just like skim through it just to say that you read it. It will allow you to be a little bit more prepared with establishing a reason and a motivator for reading the article, which is the most important thing. If you don't want to read, then it's not as likely that you'll be engaged and comprehend what you're reading. So that is why I encourage you to do strategies before you read. So in the next video, we'll be talking about strategies that you can do while you read.